הניסים ועל הברכן ועל הגבורות ועל התשועות ועל הנפלאות, על הניסים ועל הברכן ועל הגבורות ועל התשועות ועל הנפלאות שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה, בזמן הזה שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה.
Welcome to Jewish Life, a program presented in cooperation with the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York. I'm your host, Stewart Ain. Every week we present programs of particular interest to the Jewish community, and today we have a real treat. We're going inside the American Jewish Archives with its executive director, Gary Zola. He's also the Edward Ackerman Family Distinguished Professor of the American Jewish Experience and Reform Jewish History at the Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion in Cincinnati. And we'll later be joined by Mollie Newman. She's Director of Marketing at a huge synagogue in Cincinnati, Ohio. So welcome to you both. And Gary, can you tell us about the American Jewish Archives for those folks who don't know about it?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to do that. And to do that, I'm going to share my screen so I can show you some illustrations of it. So first, let me make sure that you're all seeing what I'm seeing. Is that pop up real nice now?
Perfect.
Great. So you're looking right now at a sketching, an old sketching, actually from the American Jewish Archives of the historic Cincinnati campus of Hebrew Union College. And as you know, Stewart, and Mollie knows, the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati is the oldest rabbinical seminary in continuous existence in the Western Hemisphere. And this building where I'm pointing with my mouse is where we currently have the American Jewish Archives. The campus is much bigger now. And let me just tell you that the American Jewish Archives is about to be 75 years old. It was started by my teacher, Professor Jacob Rader Marcus. Dr. Marcus is famous for being known as the first American-born, scientifically trained scholar to focus on the history of Jewish life in America. Believe it or not, in the 19th century, barely any attention was paid to American Jewish history and the American Jewish experience. Marcus is really the founder of the field, and in 1947, he decided to create the American Jewish Archives. This is how it looked in 1947. It just took a couple of manuscripts that came from the library, the magnificent Clow Library at the on the campus, and brought it over, and that's how it started. Now I'm going to show you how the building looks today with an animated video. This is the complex of the American Jewish Archives. It's actually 3 interlocking buildings that contain all sorts of things. I'm going to show you photos of that in just a minute. So you folks on the East Coast who are watching this, we want you to come and visit the historic Cincinnati campus one day and see where we keep the history of American Jewry. That's an actual photo of the way the entrance looks now. And just a few little clips from the inside. This is the reading room of the American Jewish Archives. It was at one time the library reading room, but it has been, as I say, for almost 75 years, the reading room of the American Jewish Archives. This is where scholars study. And it is, I think, the most beautiful room of any of the rooms that we have at any of our campuses at HUC. Of course, I'm a bit prejudiced. And we also have an electronic classroom. I wish I was speaking to you from that classroom today, but we can broadcast programs all over the world, which we do. We have seminars for scholars. And finally, we publish, the American Jewish Archives publishes only one of 2 scholarly journals that are that's dedicated to the entirety of the American Jewish experience. So that's called the American Jewish Archives Journal, and folks who are interested in it, we send that out for free. It comes twice a year. So, Stewart, I hope that that's a nice introduction to the
Perfect.
American Jewish Archives.
Yes, great. That's it. Now you have a very famous document. You've got a lot of famous documents, but I guess would you say this is the most famous document? We're talking about the document, the telegram sent by Gerhard Rigner back in 1942. Tell us about that.
All right. Well, that is, I think you're probably right. The best known document and a very important document. I want to begin by showing you a picture of Mr. Rigner. Rigner, he was a lawyer and he worked for the World Jewish Congress. And you see him on the left as a young man. On the right, you see him as a more senior man. I actually had an opportunity to meet him because he received an honorary degree from the Hebrew Union College, and in the mid '80s, and I actually met him. Mr. Rigner it was his responsibility for the World Jewish Congress to do all sorts of investigation. He was stationed in Geneva, and during the beginning of World War II. It was his job to try to figure out what the Nazis were doing with the deportation of Jews. And what he didn't know, but was going to find out, is here in this beautiful bucolic mansion. This is in the city little suburb of Wannsee, which is outside of Berlin. And it's in this bucolic setting that a high-level group of Nazis under the direction directly of Hitler and Goebbels planned out and mapped out the extermination of the Jews. They did this in about 3 or 4 days, and you can go. It's a museum today. People can go. Maybe some of your audience has actually been there. And it's just gripping because they've preserved all the minutes and it's translated into many languages. Well, this took place, this meeting in Wannsee of the Nazis in January of 1942. And in around March, Mr. Rigner receives by the way, I'll just show you some of the characters who were at this meeting. These are what you might call mid-managers of the Nazi regime, but few of them are quite famous. I think everybody knows the name of Eichmann. He was there. He took the minutes of that meeting. And then, of course, there was Gerhard Heydrich, who was probably the most influential and important of them, later assassinated outside of Prague. When an informant that is being paid off tells Mr. Rigner about this meeting and what the Nazis had planned, Rigner decides he needs to send this information to his bosses, to Rabbi Stephen Wise, the international president of the World Jewish Congress. And also he decides he's going to send it, fortunately, he's going to send it to the head of the British World Jewish Congress, a man by the name of Samuel Silverman. And I wish I had time in this program to tell you all the machinations that went on, because it took him from about March until August of 42 to get that telegram sent, because the telegram could not be sent through Western Union because the war was on. So as you pointed out, Stewart, it had to be sent through military attaché. And the Consul General of the United States in Geneva couldn't believe the telegram. It was too outrageous. And so there was, I'd like to get into it, but just basically it took many months of negotiation till finally the text was acceptable. And in August, it was sent. It was sent to two people, as I said. It was sent to Rabbi Wise, and then it was sent to Mr. Samuel Silverman in Britain. And this is the telegram. This is an actual picture of the original telegram that we have. And the only thing I want to show the audience is, even though, as you see, it was addressed to Stephen Wise, this telegram, you notice it's a Western Union telegram. And I just got through saying they couldn't send it through Western Union. So what's going on here? Well, to do that, I have to turn to page 2. And you see that the telegram is signed by Samuel Silverman. That's the British head of the World Jewish Congress. Here's what happened. We now know that Rabbi Wise's telegram, though it was sent to him, was through military attaché. It was never delivered to him. It was kept from him. It was kept in the State Department. And the same thing almost happened to Mr. Silverman's telegram. The only problem was that Rabbi Wise, of course, was a rabbi and didn't work for the government, but Silverman was a member of parliament. And after a few weeks, the British decided we better not withhold it. So the telegram from the military attaché did come through to Britain, and then Mr. Silverman sends it on to Stephen Wise. And here is the telegram and what Silverman says. The first line is actually from Silverman. He says to Wise, I've received through the Foreign Office the following message from Rigner. And now here's the message that Silverman received and that Wise should have received. Received an alarming report that in the Führer's headquarters, a plan discussed and under consideration that all Jews in countries occupied or controlled by Germany, numbering 3.5 to 4 million, should, after deportation and concentration in the East, at one blow, be exterminated to resolve once and for all the Jewish question in Europe. I go to the second page. The action is planned for autumn. Well, of course, friends, this is already autumn by the time this comes. And we do know today that by the time this even arrives, already close to 1 million Jews had been exterminated. And that's the tragedy of it all. And as you can see, it says methods under discussion include prussic acid. They got that right. And then here comes the line that apparently made it possible for this to be sent. We transmit this information with all necessary reservation, as exactitude cannot be confirmed, but the informant is stated to have close connections with the highest German authorities and his reports generally reliable. And the last line is again Silverman, informant consultant New York, that's from Rigner. And then the last line is, he says the British Foreign Office has no information bearing on or confirming this story. We now know today that is not true. The end of this tragic story, Mollie and Stewart, is that in 1993, exactly 50 years after this was sent, a great American scholar who taught at that time at American University, a man by the name of Richard Brightman. Some people may have read his works. He's published quite a bit on the Holocaust. He was doing research in the National Archives. And of course, as we know, any document that is not security concerned relating to the United States has to be released after 50 years. And so Brightman writes in one of the introductions to his volume that he was doing research and had been many times through these folders. And then in 1993, the original telegram that was sent to Rabbi Wise and never delivered was delivered to him and put before him. So there was a time when this was the only telegram, but tragically, we know that the State Department, these were probably middle manager people, President Roosevelt, cabinet officials knew nothing about this. They were not directing that it be withheld or anything. This was a decision made by the State Department. And it's very sad because it is part of, a whole story that now is, we know about the apathy and the disinterest, which just compounded the brutality of the Nazi regime. So that's the first document I wanted to show you, and it's often considered to be our most important and valuable document. It came to us, Stewart, as a part of the collection of the World Jewish Congress. The American Jewish Archives is not only the archives of the College of Hebrew Union College, it is an American Jewish Archives, and we have the major collections of the various significant organizations and institutions, B'nai B'rith, World Jewish Congress, American Jewish Committee, and so forth. Lots and lots of very major institutions, as well as smaller ones.
Thank you, Dr. Zola. That's really an amazing document, and such a shame that it got stopped when it did. I did want to ask you about another document that you have, the Treifa banquet menu. This is from HUC's first ordination in 1883. And tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, you know, when the Hebrew Union College opened its doors, which was in the year 1875, you're looking here at a photo of where the students met. This is a synagogue in Cincinnati that no longer stands. It was knocked down. It's called the Mound Street Temple. It was this beautiful, beautiful facility that belonged to Rockdale Temple, which we know exists today, though at that time it was known as the Mound Street Temple. And in this room here, which I'm about to show you, a little vestry room underneath the sanctuary, this is where the first classes of Hebrew Union College took place. It's important that I show these pictures because nothing of this exists anymore. It's all gone. And if we didn't have these photos, we would have nothing. So that's part of what archival work is about too, not just letters and documents, but all sorts of images and photos. Sometimes the classes met at the Plum Street Temple, which is still standing today and quite famous on Plum Street. This is an old sketching of it from the turn of the century. But this is how the Plum Street Temple looks today. Visitors to Cincinnati don't want to miss. This is where Isaac Mayer Wise himself preached. In 1883, in the early 1880s, I should say, they bought a mansion, and this was the way the Hebrew Union College looked then. And it was in 1883, that's the doorway of the, you see it says Hebrew Union College. But in 1883, the very first 4 American-trained rabbis, a historic event took place after 8 years after the opening of the school. These 4 men, Israel Aaron, Henry Berkowitz, Joseph Krauskopf, and David Phillipson, were all ordained rabbis. This was a great big event in American Jewish history. It was the marking of a new era that America would train its own rabbis. And all the congregations that had joined together in the Union of American Hebrew Congregations to help support the college, they had a meeting to celebrate this. They had a gathering, and that was in July of 1883. And this is where they gathered. They gathered at a beautiful hotel called the Highland House Hotel. This is on Mount Adams, Molly. And if you look at the wall, you can see this beautiful veranda. This would be like the Ritz today. I mean, this was really a remarkable facility. You had dining facilities and lodging. I don't know if you can see to the side. You see where this flag is over here and this building where my mouse is moving. This was a funicular. And believe it or not, you got on a little funicular, a little train, and it took you right down to the banks of the Ohio. That's how fancy this was. And this is where a banquet celebrating the ordination of these first 4 rabbis was held. And when the delegates, about 200 of them, mostly lay people, you know, from congregations all over America, had come to Cincinnati, when they sat down, they saw a little teeny menu on everybody's plate. This was, you know, very fancy affair. And this is how it looked. It had little ostrich feathers, blue feathers all around it. And there you have it, the banquet for the delegates from the Union of American Hebrew Congregations. There's the date, Highland House, Cincinnati, Ohio. And then they opened it up because they wanted to see what they were going to have for dinner that night at that fancy affair. And here's the menu. And your audience, of course, is going to note some very strange Jewish foods on the menu. So, for example, you see little neck clams is how they opened up. And that was followed by soft shell crabs and a little salad de shrimp, as you see. And there was even over here, I didn't circle it, but you can see grenouille is frog legs, which to the best of my knowledge is not kosher. And the main course was chicken. And you know, you might as well have ice cream for dessert if you're going to have all of that. The big question is, why did that happen? And this is the most interesting part of it all, because so many false stories have been put forward to explain that make no sense, but people believe it. So first of all, people say, well, Isaac Mayer Wise was a radical Reform Jew, and he did this deliberately to show that we don't anymore have to observe the traditional laws of kashrut. Well, that's not true. Isaac Wise was not a radical reformer. He was a moderate. And the last thing he would want to do, Mollie, would be to do anything to endanger his school. So knowingly to upset people would be something he would never do. Then, of course, there are people who have made the case, well, the caterer was not Jewish, and they told him to make fish, and he was not Jewish. He didn't understand that these fish were not the right fish to make. But that's not true either, because we know who the caterer was, and the caterer was a Jew.
Oh,
And so that couldn't explain it either. And then people say that the people who came were so angry and upset at what they saw that they immediately left the room in indignation and went down to the train station and went back to New York City, where they established the Jewish Theological Seminary in opposition to the radical nature of the Hebrew Union College. But that's not true either, because this is, as I said, 1883, and the doors of the JTS don't open until 1887. That's a very slow burn. So what's the explanation? What is the explanation? Well, I think I have the explanation for you, and that is thanks to the American Jewish Archives, because we have all sorts of menus from the same period from different Jewish banquets. So, for example, here is a menu from the year 1886. If you can see where my mouse is, it says 1886 is only a few years later. And here is a menu from a big banquet from the Grand District Lodge in New Orleans, Louisiana. And I'm going to blow up now the menu, just one little piece of it. You see they have turtle soup and oysters. But you say, well, maybe that's an exception. Zola's exaggerating. So let's go to, here is a golden wedding anniversary invitation. This couple married, the Hayes couple, Abraham and Fanny, they married in 1845. And 50 years later, in 1895, they had a 50th anniversary wedding celebration. And if you just look at the menu, you see, oh, they start out with oysters on the shelf. And even at the Hebrew Union College, at an alumni, where rabbis at an alumni event where they were honoring a professor who had his 70th birthday, we have that menu and many others, and you see up at the very top, oysters. What we know is this. It was the Eastern European Jews who begin to come here in the 1880s and really become important at the turn of the 20th century, who were much more concerned about maintaining some decorum with regard to food and dietary laws. The Jews who were in Cincinnati in 1883 were part of that Central European migration that had come in the 1840s and 1850s. And many of them came out to the Midwest and to the South, and they had already Americanized. They weren't yet eating pork in these events. That would come. But in these days, they just assumed that this was sort of American food. You know, Isaac Mayer Wise supposedly said, well, it's called in French, fruit de la mer. And what does that mean? It just means sea fruit. So I don't know if he said that or not, but the important thing is the menus prove that what they were doing was nothing unusual. And that's why the majority of these lay people, there were a rabbi or a few rabbis who were irked, who were there, but the majority were lay people, and they ate this way. This is how they went to banquets, and this is what they did, and they were accustomed to it. But that menu that I just showed you is the only surviving menu from that one famous banquet. It's really a very remarkable document.
Tremendous, tremendous. Well, now I know you also have, there was an incident that back in 1841, I guess there was a letter from Jacob Ezekiel.
Yeah,
I guess it was sent to the, was it sent to the President, Tyler?
Yeah, here's an actual photo of Ezekiel. He was born in America, and born in Philadelphia, but lived most of his middle life in Richmond, Virginia. He was a business person, and then later in life he moved to Cincinnati. Those in the audience who are familiar with the famous, very famous Jewish artist by the name of Moses Ezekiel, that's his son. Jacob Ezekiel's son is the great artist Moses Ezekiel. At any rate, what happens is, some of the audience surely will know, those who are history buffs, that in 1840, the United States elected a president. That president's name was William Henry Harrison. Up until Reagan, he was the oldest president elected. And he had a little known vice president. And after all, in those days, the vice president was a very unimportant position. He took for himself a vice president from Richmond, Virginia. That would have been the famous war cry, as you know, was Tippecanoe and Tyler too. And Harrison is elected, and at his inauguration, as we know, this famous story, he spoke for a couple of hours in a rainstorm, and he ended up catching pneumonia.
Yes.
The next morning, he had a temperature. He deteriorates quickly, and within 30 days, he's dead. He never, ever even really fulfills one task of the presidency. Now, any American rabbi knows that if you speak for 2.5 hours on any occasion, you're going to be struck dead by your congregation. They know that. But apparently the president didn't understand that, and he lost his life. So Tyler becomes the very first man to accede to the presidency. And in doing so, the first thing he does is he asks the American people to please go into their houses of worship and to say prayers of lamentation for the fallen president. But his proclamation, unfortunately, begins with the words, given that we are a Christian nation or a Christian people, and this upsets Mr. Ezekiel, and he apparently knows Tyler from Richmond, and he writes this letter. The key sentence here is that during the revolution of this country, the blood of all denominations was shed for its freedom. In those days, there was no distinction. It was not asked whether it was Christian, Jewish, or pagan blood that flowed freely for the liberty we all now possess.
Great. We've run out of time, but we have other documents, so we'll do the next part next week. We'll do more. My name is Stewart Ain, and with Mollie, we'll see you next week.
Great.